Welcome back. So let's talk about the origins of life as far back as the Archean eon. So we're going to get into the biosphere and biology. Truth be told, it's not my favorite subject. In fact, biology might be my least favorite subject. Probably because I just wasn't good at memorizing things. No knock on biology. It's more of a knock on me, I guess. But in any case, since I dislike biology, I'm going to try to keep this as interesting, at least for me, as possible. So hopefully it's as interesting as you, and kind of focus more so in the realm of geology. So when we're talking about the Hadean, we don't have any life, evidence of life. Hell, we barely have any rocks. So when we're looking at origins of life, we have to look in the Archean eon once this gets started. So today, our biosphere consists of millions of species, and they're separated into six different kingdoms of archaea, bacteria, fungi, protists, plants, and animals. However, of those, only bacteria and archaea are found in Archean rocks. These are some of the oldest and most ancient and simple forms of life. We have fossils from Archean rocks that date back about 3.5 billion years ago, and possibly some chemical evidence of life in some rocks from Greenland that might be 3.8 billion years old, but still to be determined. So we have, again, the early archaea and bacteria. These are kind of the early forms of life, and then it branched out into plants and animals and fungus and protists, and these are in the domain of eukarya. So what am I talking about? So bacteria, protists, still very simple single or multi-celled organisms. It's not until we get into fungi and plants and animals that we get of life of what we think. So for most of Earth's history, these are what existed. Not even fish. These things are what existed. Definitely not dinosaurs. These are what existed. So archaea and bacteria, these are both single-celled organisms. They can thrive in harsh or normal environments, harsh environments like what we had in early Earth. Hence, archaea are some of the first organisms that evolved onto Earth. But how did they get there? The origin of life has two requirements. A source of appropriate elements for organic molecules, so we need to make the organic molecules that make up the living things. And then energy. And you need energy sources to promote chemical reactions. Remember, we need energy to get things to react. We need sunlight in order to take carbon dioxide and water, plus that energy, that sunlight, to make glucose and oxygen in the process of photosynthesis. So let's talk about the elements of life, the organic molecules that we need. So all organisms, all living organisms, are composed mostly of four things. There's other stuff, but mostly four elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. Those four things. Well, from what we learned, and good for us, is that in the early atmosphere, all of those were present. So we have carbon in carbon dioxide and methane. We have hydrogen in water vapor and methane and ammonia. We have nitrogen in nitrogen gas and ammonia. We have oxygen in carbon dioxide, water vapor. So we have the ingredients in our early atmosphere of what all organisms are mostly comprised of. There's other things as well. Okay, so we have the ingredients. What about the energy sources? Yep. Lightning from storms, heat from volcanism, and then the ultraviolet radiation, or even the sunlight, right? So then we have those energy sources. So now we can combine the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen to form monomers, mono meaning one, these single kind of molecules such as amino acids. Amino acids are important in making proteins. They're the building blocks of proteins. So monomers are the basic building blocks of more complex organic molecules. So we need those monomers. For example, we need those amino acids first. And amino acids are made up of these four things, which we had, and then we need an energy source to combine those things. So how do we know that this is how it got started? Well, in the 1950s, we actually ran an experiment to look at just the thing. So in the 1950s, we had an experiment where we had boiling water. So we had a heat source and water. We had a bunch of gases in here, just like we had in the early atmosphere, and then electrodes to simulate a lightning bolt. So a spark, some energy. So we had these electrodes giving a spark to all of these gases. Well, what we found out eventually is that after a while, several amino acid types typical of organisms formed from this experiment, in this closed experiment. So they started to get, this water started to get a little cloudy, and they're like, wait, what's in there? Turns out amino acids. They were able to synthesize, make amino acids from gases, from water, from gases, and from electricity. So an energy source. So that's how we kind of figured that out. So the early Earth's atmosphere was able to help induce and start to create these amino acids, which are the building blocks of bigger organic molecules. Cool. So how do we go from monomers, like amino acids, to polymers? The molecules of organisms are polymers consisting of a bunch of monomers linked together. Proteins are polymers. Nucleic acids like RNA, ribonucleic acid, and DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Those are a chain of monomers, so known as a polymer. So we had to start with the monomers first. Researchers, kind of similarly, were able to synthesize polymers when heating concentrated amino acids. These concentrated amino acids spontaneously polymerized to form proteinoids. These are kind of things on their way to becoming proteins. So in the lab, we were to take monomers and recreate and then create polymers from there. However, similar conditions for polymerization existed on early Earth, as in this experiment, but the proteins themselves needed to be protected by an outer membrane, or they would break down. So the experiment showed that proteinoids spontaneously aggregate, come together into these microspheres, which are kind of bounded by cell-like membranes, and grow to divide, much as bacteria do. So just recreating Earth's early conditions in an experiment helped us to create this. So we start to get these chains of polymers, and they started to bind together to have these cell membrane-like structures to keep things safe. Fast forward to protobionts. These proteinoid molecules can be referred to as protobionts. This is kind of an in-between between inorganic chemical compounds, not quite alive, and living organisms. It's not a living organism itself, but it's stuff that living organisms need to be living. These polymers, these chains of proteins, and things like RNA and DNA. Now, all of this in early Earth existed in a primordial soup. Maybe you've heard of that term. So monomers likely formed continuously and by the billions and accumulated in the early oceans into this hot, dilute soup known as a primordial soup. So early oceans a little bit hotter, and you got these amino acids in there, so it's like the soup of organic material. The oceans, as they're kind of the waves and tides and such, as they're crashing up onto the shore, bring these amino acids up onto the beach, and perhaps they were concentrated in some location, and then evaporation, took the water away. So these amino acids were concentrated in a certain area, and then due to the heat of maybe a nearby volcano, they were polymerized. Went from monomers to polymers, kind of joined up. Then those polymers maybe washed back into the ocean where they reacted further. Not much. So now we have these kind of in between protobionts, like these not quite living, not quite inorganic, not quite organic. It's somewhere in the middle, but not much is known about the next step, and that's the development of a reproductive mechanism. So if what we know about all things that are living is that they reproduce somehow. So not much is known about that next step. So in the RNA world, ribonucleic acid, the first replicating systems may have been RNA molecules, so these polymers. Again, they may have been that intermediate between the inorganic chemical compounds and then the DNA-based molecules of all living organisms. How RNA was synthesized remains kind of an unsolved problem. However, some scientists suggest that maybe life arose instead near not on the ocean surface or in the atmosphere or on land, but perhaps maybe by hydrothermal vents on the sea floor. Because guess what? Down there we have minerals and we have heat. Remember the black smokers? So maybe life began down on the sea floor. And this primordial soup, maybe all the good stuff collected at the bottom, right? Ever making soup, got all the liquidy stuff at the top and all the good chunky stuff down at the bottom? Maybe it developed here. We saw this earlier when we're talking about mineral deposits. But maybe, just maybe, again, we have minerals, we have a energy source. Maybe this is what we need. So, submarine hydrothermal vents, these black smokers, again, it looks like black smoke coming out here. So what we have, again, is seawater is seeping into that crust, usually near these spreading ridges, so divergent boundaries, becomes heated, dissolved minerals, rises, discharges, we've talked about this, and that mineral-rich superheated water comes out of these vents and it looks like black smoke, so that's why they call them black smokers. So that water, again, saturated with dissolved minerals. Polymerization can take place on the surface of clay minerals surrounding vents. The clay particles have the ability to host polymerization. I'm not sure how, but that's what I've been told. So where they have the location, they have the minerals, they have an energy source, so life may have formed near these in the past instead of maybe in the upper regions of the ocean or on land or in the atmosphere. So communities of organisms previously unknown to science are supported here currently. For instance, tube worms. Now, I'm not saying tube worms were the first organism, but if tube worms can thrive in these sort of environments, maybe other things can. Tube worms are not closely related to anything else on Earth. They're very different. Their evolutionary path was in the far distant path. They are way different than anything else. The vent community, the things living around the vent, is ancient and has evolved little over millions, if not billions of years. So again, I'm not saying these tube worm, which are these things down here, are the first organisms, but they are these unique things that evolved a long, long time ago. And if they can get started here and become these complex organisms, well then maybe so could have other things. As long as you got the minerals, and you got the energy. You got the organic material, and you got the energy. That's all you need. All right. So that's just a little bit about how maybe life got going. When we come back, we'll talk about Earth's actual oldest organisms, those first organisms that we have evidence of that are about 3.5 billion years old. So pause here, and I'll see you back here in just a second.